it's through grief that we enter the commons of the soul. I mean, every human being that you meet on the street is carrying a casket full of grief. Every one of us. I mean, how could you possibly not feel sorrow these days for what is happening in Gaza or in Ukraine or Congo or any place on the planet right now? In our own neighborhoods, the ambient field is saturated with sorrow right now and fear. And so to not speak it, to not have that witnessed, we're basically becoming a self-contained unit for that feeling state. And we can't tolerate that. There's no way on earth any one of us can stay open to the sorrows of the world if we don't have places to take that.
Welcome to the Passing Through Podcast, a show dedicated to exploring those spaces not just within, but also between and around us. The cracks in the walls, the moments between the moments. I speak with thinkers, authors, artists, teachers, and everyday humans who have touched the edge of the ordinary and found something to bring back. I've got an exciting episode for you this week, and I am itching to jump into it, so let me just burn through this introduction as quickly as humanly possible. This is going to be a continuation on a theme which we introduced last week about grief. Except this week, I'm honored to have passed through this space with someone who's been a teacher and an inspiration to me, Francis Weller. Francis is a retired psychotherapist, he's a renowned author, and a grief worker who has opened up his life to an apprenticeship with sorrow. He's written extensively on the topic in a book that I have named on this podcast numerous times called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, and most recently in a book called In the Absence of the Ordinary, and we're going to talk about both of those. We are going to go into the darkness armed with some tissues and a few moments of silence to interrogate questions like, how do we work with grief? Why is it important to metabolize our sorrow in a group setting? How does grief work and grief ritual differ from group therapy or support groups? And what is it that grief is asking of us? We're going to explore sorrow as an animate force and darkness as friend, not foe. We're going to discuss a lot of things ranging from ritual to grief work and space holding. And while I'm sure some listeners of this show are involved directly with grief work, maybe death doulas or hospice workers or people who facilitate restorative circles or other group processes, some of us aren't in these spaces. But I want to note that space holding isn't only applicable to facilitators of group work. Space holding is something that is happening every day. We're doing it all day, every day. We can space hold for ourselves, to permit ourselves to feel feelings and connect with what's going on in our inner world. We can hold space for family and friends who may be grieving or going through a tough time. Or we could be holding space for groups, doing facilitation work. But no matter who you are, space holding is an important capacity during these times of darkness, uncertainty, despair, and pain. And space holding can teach us how to be there, not just for ourselves, but for others. And so we're going to talk about this. We're going to explore a whole bunch of fascinating stuff that I am truly grateful to have had the opportunity to speak with Francis about, because he has decades of experience in this work. So I was truly grateful to hear his perspectives and sit down with him for a conversation. It was an important one for me, and I hope that you can find something valuable to take away from it. If you want to learn more about Francis, you can find him at francisweller.net. I will have links to his website and his books in the show notes for this episode and also on the passingthroughpodcast.com. So as always, be good to one another and let's wade together into these deep, deep waters of grief. Okay, so welcome to the Passing Through podcast, Francis. It's great to have you.
Thanks for inviting me, Danny.
Before we get into the thick of it, I just wanted to start with a little bit of gratitude and say that it's a real honor to sit down with you today, because when I read The Wild Edge of Sorrow, I was really powerfully pulled to your work. And I remember thinking, yeah, this guy really gets it. Like it was, it was really beautiful writing and so much
Mm,
heart. And I'd say that your book and Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, are two of maybe the most important books I've read in a long time. So I
mm.
recommend them to anyone and everyone, like in an annoying way. And I even printed a gigantic decal of your head and put it on the outside of my van to spread the good word around Europe. So it's honestly, it's really great to be in conversation with you here.
Well, thank you. I'm very touched by that.
And so for my first question, have you ever wondered what effect the presence of tissues has on a grief circle?
Well, they are the receiving devices, right? They're the receptor places for all the fluids that need to move. And we treat them like holy artifacts after the ritual. They're gathered ritually and taken care of. When we are at the grief shrine, we tell people don't bring them back to the village. Just let them fall. That the grief ritual area should look like a disaster area when we're done.
Mm.
We've just set down generations of sorrow and leave it there. We've got a team of people who will clean this up, gather these sacred artifacts and take care of them. So they're a very important piece of the ritual, and we address it very directly. So I like the question. Never been asked that one before.
And you just gave some interesting insights there. I almost heard the reverse of that famous Thich Nhat Hanh quote where he talks about seeing the cloud in the piece of paper. Here you're kind of getting the tear into the tree and connecting with our larger ecological self through the grief and through the shrine. So that's really interesting. I didn't even know that you did that.
That I did grief rituals?
Well, no, that you leave the tissues at the shrine.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. I mean, we've experimented with that for years and finding the best way to, in a sense, practice good hygiene as well. Soul hygiene, communal hygiene. And when you're expressing this, I mean, in many cultures, grief is considered a toxin.
Hmm.
You want to move it out of your body. You don't want to become a warehouse for your sorrow. You don't want to have a U-Haul behind you dragging decades and generations of sorrow. So keeping it current, keeping it moving is very important. And so that's a kind of soul hygiene. And then there's the communal hygiene of how do we take care of one another and how do we take care of what we've just expressed. And so that's what we have really come to is let's honor this, let's care for it, but let's not bring it back to the village.
And I guess I want to explore some of those things about community, about good hygiene, about why society and our culture, not all societies, but dominant Western culture, sees grief in this way. Why is it something that's like almost carcinogenic? We want to relegate it to some other place and not talk about it and press it down. And so all of these things are like fertile soil for conversational topics, but I'm sure we'll get there, but I wanted to step back a little bit and start with a quote that I found important and maybe it's something that could anchor us in this conversation, because through the conversation, I'm curious about leaning into animacy a bit, because along with ecology and spirituality and ritual, these topics are ones that I'm excited to explore with you. And there's a quote from your most recent book, In the Absence of the Ordinary, that I really loved. And I want to read it here because I think for listeners, to help give them some context, this could be useful. So you wrote, "We can't force things in the darkness. The legitimacy of our heroic efforts feels empty in the shadowed terrain of the long dark. This is a place of waiting, silence, vigil, and alert witnessing. Something is here. A vital and animating presence is here in the darkness. Patience encourages us to become receptor sites for the emerging dream of the earth. This is holy work. And I'm really interested in talking about this work. But before we do, I think it's important to ask, what's the something that's in the darkness?
Well, it's a hard thing to name, isn't it? I mean, it's mystery. It's in the old language, it would be the anima mundi, the soul of the world. There's some animating presence, energetic, that connects everything together and that infuses each thing with its own suchness, its own presence. And when we're receptive to that, when the heart and the soul are not encumbered by conditioning, we are in conversation with that otherness, right? We are in conversation with that essential quality of the earth, of life. And, you know, and I'm referencing the long dark there. I'm talking about where we are as a species and as a planet, that we've entered into this territory of descent, into this darkness. And the heroic pursuits, that goes back to your earlier comments about why we have a hard time with grief. This heroic ideal is really collapsing. It's crashing. Thank goodness. There's beauty in the heroic ideal in our youth, but we never get out of it. We keep, marshaling onward, muscularly trying to force things and determine outcomes rather than participating in collaborations and in communion with the surrounding biosphere. I'll stop there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I like that a lot. There's so many threads in there to touch on. But the I guess I'll touch on the last one, the being in communion with our biosphere. And I guess this goes back to the tissues again. So I like how we're getting in kind of spiraling circular spaces, because one form of grief that you talk about is this kind of like ecological grief. And I would venture to say that a lot of the grief that we feel is inspired by this. It has this as its source or as its origin, the literal energies of waves, some kind of energetic wave pattern coming up out of the earth because of the place that we're in right now, because of the extractive, destructive way that we've objectified and mistreated the earth. Do you feel that that ecological grief kind of travels through us? It uses us as antennas or radio towers to kind of use us to feel?
Absolutely. I think I wrote about that quite a bit in the third gate of grief, which is the sorrows of the world, that we are, how could we possibly be separate from what is happening to our watersheds, to our glaciers, to our creatures, our fellow kin? How could we possibly be separate from that? We're the same body. We're the same tissue. We're the same breath.
Yes.
So, I wrote about how when there was the Gulf oil spill, I think it's 2010, how I'd wake up in the middle of the night sobbing, and I'd be hearing in my inner ear the sound of dolphins dying and shorebirds suffocating. And I was 2,000 miles away from my physical body, but psychically, it was me. There's no separation. That is really the outcome of a maturation process that was the design of most traditional cultures, was to ripen their people. And part of that ripening was to make them porous, permeable to the intimacies of exchange between the human and the more than human world. So that wasn't seen as an objective thing out there. It was seen as a continuation of relationship, of kinship. And I think that's part of what's kind of coming back into reality through our grief work. Is most of what we grieve is not personal. It is communal. It is collective.
Mm.
It is not mine, but I'm intimate with it because it's part of who I am. And I think that's the place that gives me some measure of hope right now, is that more and more people are recognizing the communal aspect of grief. And when I first started doing grief rituals back in the late 90s, maybe one or two of the people in the circle were there because of what we call earth grief. But towards the end, when we were passing this on and doing more training around this, two-thirds of the people in the room were there because of earth grief. And that gave me some small measure of hope that it might be the broken heart that saves our ass. It might be the broken heart that can once again let in the beauty of this world. Because if we're sheltered, if we're, refusing to feel that grief, the heart then can't be a receptor site also for the beauty of this world. We become, in a sense, almost immune to the world or mute to the world. We don't speak to it anymore. We don't listen to it anymore. And that's part of our earth grief too. It's not just what's happened to the world, it's that we have forgotten the world.
Mm.
We've left the world in favor of economics and progress and development and growth. These have become our obsessions, not a daffodil, not the song of a lark. Those things, they're cute, but they don't, enamor us like they used to. That's part of our grief too, is what we have forgotten in terms of that intimacy with the world.
Mm. Just letting that sit for a moment, because I like to give space to those kind of observations, because I think space is needed to digest that and move through it. And fortunately, we're on a podcast, so I have to compress some of that down. But there's something I wanted to touch on, because you mentioned the maturation process, and that over time you've seen people move closer to this idea of communal grief. And would I be correct in saying that part of what causes this forgetting, this fracture, this separation, is the fact that we have lost a sense of cultural initiation that would facilitate this maturation process and connect us to the natural world?
100%. I mean, there's a couple factors we could say before that, is that in a society, again, particularly white Western society, where our threads of belonging are so threadbare that we become very insecure in our own sense of belonging. So our attention, when that's iffy, our attention turns inward and we begin to become self-absorbed, self-obsessed. And psychology has colluded with that terribly,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that we're focused so much on individual growth and development. Those are not bad things, by the way. But by this inward gaze, we have left the world. So as the soul is without world, the world is without soul. We kind of forget that that's a case, a truth, that there's a soulfulness both inside and outside. But when I'm focused on the self, which is very different than the soul, we become distant, abstracted from the world. And so the purpose of initiation was never about personal growth. It had nothing to do with the individual. It was a preparation. It was invitation towards a certain degree of participation in that maintenance of the commons. So you are being prepared not for your own self, but for the work of maintaining living culture, maintaining relationship to the ancestors, to everything that's around you. And in that case, we are so far behind many, many traditional cultures. I mean, I look at cultures that have survived a minimum of 10,000 years and ask myself, how did they do that?
Mm.
How did they do that? What values, what practices, what did they do that allowed them to get past? I mean, we've been on this continent, white folks, for 500 years, and we're almost exhausted what we can do here. So those cultures that have lived 20, 30, 75, 100,000 years, what were their basic values and how did they do that? So reciprocity, mutuality, restraint, which is a word you don't even use in white Western culture. Restraint, oh my God, no, this is the have it all society. Whatever
Yes.
you want, you can get it. There's no hesitation. So those values of gratitude and patience, deep listening, those are not the values that we espouse. We like growth and power and progress and privilege and rank and material goods. We don't see those as symptoms. We see those as values. But to me, they're symptoms.
Mm.
They're symptoms of this great amnesia that what we have forgotten. The primary satisfactions is the things that shaped us over 300 or 400,000 years as a species. We are here because of success. They figured out what we need in order to not just survive, but to actually ripen. And over the last, 500 to 2,000 years, that knowing, particularly in Northern European cultures, has basically been forgotten. And we've become economic units. We've become psychological units rather than mythological beings participating in a mythological, display. And
Yeah.
so, yes, the answer to your question is yes. Initiation plays a big, big role in whether or not we can show up for these times. And I do feel that I wrote a preface for a book called Choosing Earth a few years ago. And it was a difficult preface to write because what Dwayne Elgin does in this book is he lays out the next 7 decades with a kind of a prescriptive expectation for each decade. And it was bleak. It was heavy as hell. And he wanted me to write a preface for this book. It's like, well, what do you say? And part of what I said was that we are in a rough initiation as a species. And if we make it through this, there's a possibility of of living culture again. If we don't, that'll be an enormous sorrow for the earth. Yeah.
Just giving that some more silence. I'll stop saying that too, because I'm sure that's what I'm doing. I wonder if that could be a segue for ritual and grief, because I think that is a sort of initiation when you go through those processes. I've heard Michael Meade describe it as like you die before you die. You have these little deaths. You go through these challenging processes. A grief ritual is not an easy undertaking at all. Maybe it could be useful to talk about what a grief ritual actually looks like, because for many people, they've never even participated in something like this, and it might sound obscure, it might sound strange or scary. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what a grief ritual actually is and what makes it different from, say, like a group therapy session or a support group, because to me, they're very different things.
They are quite different. And to try to describe grief ritual, there's a wide range, right? There's very simple grief rituals of a circle of 3 or 4 people just saying tonight, what we're going to do is speak about loss. And we're not going to try to fix each other. We're not going to try to make it better. We're going to witness. Grief wants witnessing. It's not trying to take us hostage. It's a presence awaiting witnessing. So that could be very simple. Light a candle, say a prayer or a poem, and listen. That could be a very simple ritual. The ones we have done over the last, almost 30 years now, is a little bit more complex. It's designed to use the potency of ritual to loosen up what we typically carry so tightly. We do 3-day grief rituals, and it usually takes the full 3 days to get to the place, particularly for white folk, to risk expressing and exposing all that they're carrying. I mean, when you live in a heroic culture like we do, the primary message is self-control. Be in control. Because again, if your belonging is tentative and uncertain, you don't want to do anything that might jeopardize the belonging. So you always
Yes.
have to look like you got it together, you know? But we don't, you know? Internally, we're screaming, we're weeping, we're lost, we're scared, and we have no place to take that. So when I was first exposed to ritual, I go, my God, this is an element that we have completely abandoned. We have a lot of what I call ceremonial events, marriages and graduations, and they're wonderful. I mean, I was raised Catholic, and going to church was fine. It was lovely, but I didn't come out changed. I came out the same. I was socially more connected to the people around me after the mass is over. But what ritual does, I call that the horizontal axis. What ritual does is it touches the vertical axis. And that's where there's a lot of fear, because we know intuitively, instinctively, that ritual can shake us loose. Ritual
Hmm.
can break us open. So we avoid it, you know, and getting people into a space over 3 days is very gradual. We call it composting. We're just kind
Mm.
of loosening the soil, turning it over, seeing what's underneath through writing practices and through singing and dancing and softening the body, softening the voice. And by the time we get to the ritual, they're ready. And the ritual is beautiful. I mean, there's something about a grief ritual that is probably one of the most exquisite things I've ever seen, because there's so much authenticity in the room. No one's pretending down there at the shrine. You can't pretend grief, you know. So the ritual is basically, there's a village area with usually, the whole village is up there to start, 30, 40 people. There are drummers. There's a song that we're singing. There's a central shrine that they're standing behind. Then there's the main grief shrine that has been what we call potentiated by bringing all of the objects down there, the photographs, the flowers, the candles, the greens. It's lush and beautiful. It's there to receive what it is we're there to offer. See, in many cultures, our grief is food for the ancestors. It feeds the other world.
Yes.
And that's why when we refuse to cry, when we refuse to grieve, we're in a sense withholding nourishment to the ancestors. So this is very important. We're trying to remember here. So when you're ready to go down to the shrine, you leave, and immediately someone follows you down there. So you're never alone at the shrine, which already is a radical alteration in our typical way of being with grief. We typically cry alone. But that person, what we call the container, is not there to interact with you. They're not there to do therapy. They're there just to support you. And if you want their hands on your back, you can ask for that. You can ask for what you need down there. But the conversation is not between humans at the shrine. The conversation is between this world and the other world. And the pitch, our grief is being pitched across this threshold into the invisible world,
Mm.
where they will digest it and metabolize it and have a party. That's they're gonna have a good feast after this ritual is over. They will eat well tonight, and we will come away feeling joyful. We will feel joyful. So I can tell you that when you're down at the shrine and there's 10, 15 other people side by side grieving with you, that is so healing all by itself. All by itself. And there's some part of our psyche that says, "This is what I've been waiting for.
Hmm.
This is the frequency. This is the cadence. This is the rhythm that my soul has been waiting for. I can't do this alone. I can't even do this fully in a therapy office." I mean, I've done that for 43 years. I was a therapist, and And people would come in and say, this is really scary. And I said, well, this is a good place to learn how to tolerate contact with your sorrow and to have another human being witnessing you there. But ultimately, you'll need a much larger healing containment field because that's what your psyche's waiting for. That's what it expected when it got here. You have something to say there.
I've been holding in the whole time because this is so everything in me is getting activated and alive right now. But the question that I had for you is why? Why does grief and sorrow need to be witnessed by the eyes of a community? What is that? Because I felt that myself. I know exactly what you're talking about, but if I had to describe it to somebody, I couldn't.
Well, I would say that the reason why it needs that is because grief from our whole story has always been communal. It's never been private. Never in our long story until very, very recent, like a fingertip, time. That's how long we've been privatizing our grief. And we can feel it, right? That this doesn't feel right to cloister this, to separate it from the world. But we live in have a nice day culture. We live in a smiley face culture. We have it. So there's no permission. And that's what I think these rituals do is they offer a quality of permission. And I can tell you, Danny, that many times after the ritual is over, somebody will say something like, I've never done anything like this before in my life, but it felt oddly familiar. So Carl Jung talked about that there's what he called an unforgotten wisdom at the core of the psyche. And I think that's what we touch into when we get into those ritual spaces. Some unforgotten memory goes, wait a minute, that's in my body. That's in my ancestral psyche. That's in my archaic psyche. I know this place. I know this feeling. So even if we've never done it before, rationally, physically, some part of us knows, yeah, this is the cadence. This is what I've been waiting for. So the psyche needs witnessing. It's not. The other thing I would say to your question is that it's through grief that we enter the commons of the soul.
Hmm.
I mean, every human being that you meet on the street is carrying a casket full of grief. Every one of us. I mean, how could you possibly not feel sorrow these days for what is happening in Gaza or in Ukraine or Congo or any place on the planet right now, in our own neighborhoods? We are living in the ambient field is saturated with sorrow right now and fear. And so to not speak it, to not have that witnessed, we're basically becoming a self-contained unit for that feeling state. And we can't tolerate that. There's no way on earth any one of us can stay open to the sorrows of the world if we don't have places to take that. And without that, we will shut down the heart. And that's what's happening is that if the heart closes, you probably know of Wendell Berry, that wonderful farmer poet.
Mm-hmm.
He said, it all turns on affection. It all turns on affection. But if my heart is closed out of self-preservation, because I can't bear to feel this alone, then my affection doesn't fall into the world. It may not even fall into my children or my friends. It'll, again, cloistered internally. So to keep it moving, to keep it flowing is very, very important.
There's a good line. It's more of a passage from a great essay by Oscar Wilde. It's called De Profundis. And in this essay, he's imprisoned for gross indecency. And he's writing about what it's like to live in sorrow in a jail cell, separated from his lover and all of this stuff. And what you just said reminded me of this line, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says something like, it's a bad day in prison when you don't cry, because it means your heart is hard. And so it's so important to keep a soft heart and let those tears out, especially in situations where there's good reason to cry. Let that move through you. Give it, feed it to the ancestors. Why they want to eat tears, I don't know. Maybe you have some insights.
I do not. I do not. It's beyond my pay grade. I'm just relating the message. So yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, thanks for sharing all that. That was really resonant with me. And it links to another question that I wanted to ask, which is kind of what you alluded to when you were talking about this field and how the field is saturated with dread and anxiety and pain. Um, I, I'm always curious when I'm in these circles because I help facilitate community building workshops, which aren't explicitly grief rituals, but to me, often tons of grief pour out in these circles. So
Mhm.
when I'm in them as a participant or as a facilitator, I'm always wondering what's happening on an energetic level, like maybe even from an animist perspective, because these wounds are spoken aloud in front of others. And then, like you said, sometimes people are in a circle and they're saying something for the first time, pain that they may have been holding on to for decades. And you can sense when someone says something, the texture in the room changes, like not necessarily in the person, sometimes in the person too, but in the literal physical space, there's something that changes in the field. And have you had that experience?
And probably every grief ritual. Yeah. You're waiting. There's a certain thing when you're facilitating. You're waiting for that one person. You don't know who it is that will say that thing that opens the trap door that
Yes.
allows us all to go down.
Yes. Yes.
So there's something. Again, we're so hesitant and cautious with revelation. We're desperate to be seen and we're afraid to be seen.
Mm.
So both are true. And depending on who's showing up for that moment, whether it's the wounded part of us, the child part of us that says, too dangerous, or the yearning adult who says, I have to join the world. So depending upon who's there, but you're hoping and you're waiting for that one comment that the door opens and we are all now going down. That's a moment of grace, absolute grace. And you know that, right? You know that feeling in the community building gatherings that something just opened here and we're all now invited in to the depths. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Beautiful. Again, beautiful articulation. And for sure, grace is the word. That's what it is. Another question I have about that is when it happens, there's an ability to touch that grace. And it feels like accessing something that is the kind of things I've accessed maybe on a psychedelic experience or in a dream state or fever, or an ecstatic dance session. It's something that is otherworldly, it seems. And I, I, have you ever thought about what it is that we're touching there? Like what's actually happening in that moment?
I think we're stepping outside of the confines of our conditioned mind. We're entering into non-consensual realities.
Hmm.
Where it's not the ordinary. That's part of what the power of ritual is that the invitation is to step outside of conventions. Like we don't cry typically at the grocery store. You know, you can, but it's not typical. So there's something about ritual space that activates unspoken dimensions of our being. So we can cry together, we can be side by side, we can hold each other, we can thank each other for grieving, we can do things in ritual space that we cannot do at the hardware store. You just don't do that. So that's the power of ritual, is that it's the signal frequency, as I mentioned before, activates something in our psyche that says, I can set this down now. I can actually become transparent to you. You can actually see who I am and what I carry.
Hmm.
And in that, there's release, there's freedom. And again, one of the things I love about grief work is that we finally get current. Because much of our life, we're kind of backing toward the grave. We're chewing on old bones and also generational bones that haven't been metabolized, haven't been honored, haven't been grieved thoroughly. So we're kind of backing our way into the grave. So when we get to really practice grief regularly, it's not a weekend event and then, done. It's a return. That's what you find in traditional culture is the repetition of ritual. It isn't a one-time thing. It's happening all the time. That's why, in the sense that they are current. In both senses of that word, like I'm here now, but I'm also in the electricity of life. I'm in the current of life, and I'm in the flow of life. That's beautiful, and I see that happening. The people who come back to grief gatherings over and over again, they're not dragging around a long sack of untouched sorrow. They're here, and they're much more joyful and alive, and the heart is soft. The soft heart is so gorgeous, to love this world. Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing. Because I've experienced that too personally, and I've seen it in groups that I've facilitated. So I exactly understand what you're talking about. And it's this weird paradoxical thing that you kind of traverse the depths of your own and the collective darkness in order to kind of open something in the heart, put something down, let in more light, make you lighter and more buoyant. And it kind of conjoins you with whatever that animating presence that we were talking about earlier is that's in the dark, right? It's that maybe is connected to that source of aliveness and enthusiasm and that animating quality.
Yeah, as long as we don't, split those 2 things, light, good, dark, bad, light up, good, down, bad. No, we absolutely cannot, and we must repair that split collectively for so many reasons, which we can all imagine. What happens when you make dark bad? Well, what if you're not light-skinned? What if you're, there's so many outcomes of that split. So when we talk about darkness and soul, that is holy ground. That is as holy as the light. So I'm not doing this so I can get enlightened. I'm doing it so I can learn how to see in the dark. As Susan Murphy, the Australian Zen teacher, said, we do this to develop a dark adapted eye,
Hmm.
so we can see differently because we are in a time of the long dark, and we need people who can see what's happening there. They can help articulate that emergent dream of the earth. There's a term, I don't know, I think I mentioned it in the book, the last one, Kartsaluni. Kartsaluni is a term that comes out of the Inuit people north of the Arctic Circle. And the word literally translates sitting quietly together in the darkness, waiting expectantly for something creative to burst forth. Isn't that gorgeous? These were the whaling people, and they couldn't go out to hunt a whale until the whale people gave them a song. There's all the values right there: reverence, restraint, reciprocity, mutuality, patience, deep listening. All of those values are right there in that dark room, in the dark longhouse, while they're waiting expectantly for one of the whale people to say, "Here's the song for you, and you may take one of our people, because we know that you depend on us to survive, and we appreciate you holding ritual ground. You don't just come out and take it because you can get it." That extractive thing you mentioned earlier, Danny. This is not extractive. This is reciprocal. This
Hmm.
is, relational process. But this is where we are right now. I think that this idea of a Kartsaluni is so beautiful that we have to learn how to sit quietly in the dark and wait. We're not going to get out of the long dark by pushing new policy agendas. Those come out of the same place that caused the problem. We need a whole different approach to how we reconnect and recalibrate to the living earth. And that's going to take us becoming a much more humble people. The arrogance that comes with the heroic is not very kind to the living fabric of the world. It's quite brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me, it just inspired a thought earlier when you were talking about ritual and these axes, the vertical axis up to the sacred and the divine and the cosmos, the horizontal axis across to other humans. This reminds me of the importance of this like diagonal axis out to the wider non-human community and all these other people that are persons that aren't human, and how that kind of hubris and heroism and that kind of just gallant cavalier attitude doesn't put any value in anything except the self.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that, there was a wonderful line that I shared in the Wild Edge of Sorrow, a quote by Paul Shepard. And Paul Shepard was he called himself a human biologist. And what he was tracking was the long story, the deep Paleolithic roots of our humanity and where we are, what happened with agriculture, and now what happens with technology. But he was asked a question once by Jonathan White. I don't remember the question, but his response was the grief and sense of loss that we often attribute to a failure in our personality is actually a feeling of emptiness, where a beautiful and strange otherness was meant to be encountered. Now, you could weep for that sentence for 1,000 years. The grief and sense of loss that we often attribute to a failure in our personality, that there's the psychological framework. It's all about me.
Mm.
But what if it's not about me? What if it's about the absence of raven? What if it's the silencing of fox? What if it's the disappearance of salmon? What if that's what I'm craving? What if that's what I'm feeling empty about? Where a beautiful and strange otherness should have been encountered. And if I extrapolate on Shepard's thought there, I think we're also supposed to see that in each other's eyes.
Mm.
That beautiful and strange otherness. We've been so domesticated, so stripped of our own feral and wild exuberance. Again, that's why I love grief, because it is feral. You cannot control grief. It is wild. It's an energy that just moves us and shakes us and drops us to our knees, and we're in that space. So when we see each other at grief rituals, there's that recognition. This is the beautiful and strange otherness I see in you. And it's beautiful and strange. And we need it, you know. Mm.
Yes, a million times.
I appreciate the pauses, Danny. I appreciate the pauses. Mhm.
I'm at a crossroads here where I'm still curious to investigate a little bit more about the group work and ritual, but we're like flirting with the edge of facilitation here, which is something that I'm also curious to pick your brain about. And the thing that inspired that was the word control that you just used, that you can't control grief. And there's this interesting thing that I've experienced, and I've only been doing this a few years, so I'm a complete novice facilitator, but this paradox, this tension between not controlling the group, not trying to control what is an emergent, uncontrollable process, but also, you know, being present, trying to guide, trying to hold space, trying to defend and respect the container. This type of thing is very curious and interesting to me because it's a delicate line. You have to surrender and know that you don't control anything, but at the same time, you have influence. And I wonder, you've been doing that for decades. I wonder what your reflections on that stuff are.
It feels like one of the most important things to do in that chair is to make sure that everyone else in the chair is in their adult presence. And what I mean by that is that grief, by and large, was basically unheld for most of us. in our youth, in our childhoods. And what doesn't get held or caught by those that we look to hold them requires us to, in a sense, to feel like that space is dangerous to go into, and that we don't. So whenever it comes up, we're, in a sense, put in a regressive state. We go back to that childhood moment of feeling alone, unsupported, afraid. So we become it's and I'll just aside there, it's almost rare to see a pure grief moment. We often see a grief panic moment. That when grief comes up, there's that simultaneous anxiety about, is this okay? Is this safe? Am I gonna get shamed? Am I gonna be rejected, kicked out? All that panic comes up alongside of the grief. And when that happens, there is a movement into a child state. So one of my main jobs in that chair is to watch the room to see, when does someone leave? I remember doing a workshop up in Canada, and a woman just said, "I have to get out of here. It's not safe." You
Mm.
know, I said, What's happening?" She says, "It's just not safe. This is dangerous." I said, "Well, can you just for a moment acknowledge that part of you that feels afraid?" And she paused and she did that. And that moment was a moment of separation. She was able to separate from the child state, return to her adult state, and then look at this part that was so afraid, because she was never held in that state. So it was terrifying. But Jung said something that has been kind of a lifelong anchor for me. He said, we can't heal what we can't separate from.
Mm.
So if that child state had persisted and taken over, she would have left the room. But what we did in that moment, that little intervention, was get her to separate out. So there was enough adult presence to say, oh, I see. I can be with this. I can hold that part. And she came back, her face changed back into an adult, because you can just almost see the panic. I'm sure you've seen that in group situations where suddenly there's this look of absolute terror on someone's face, like, I'm about to get killed. So one of the main jobs, again, is to try to help them come back to adult presence. Because as an adult, we can process most anything. But in those child states, we can almost process nothing. We can just try to survive. Yeah. So that's just one thread about the facilitation. There's a lot into that question, but
Yeah, of course. That could be an entire podcast discussion for
that
that
could
one
be a whole
question.
podcast. Yeah, yeah. I did a 5-month training based on that one question, basically. How do you do this? Yeah.
Okay. I would love to find that training somewhere because that would be a great resource for me. But maybe we could talk about that after. Um, that also touches on another thing that I wanted to touch on, which is, when you're creating a safe space for all emotions, all feelings, when everything is okay and welcome, you don't only get grief. Sometimes you get terror, sometimes you get crippling, debilitating fear, sometimes you get rage. I'm wondering, in your work, if you have any stories or examples or experiences where something happened, something arrived in the space, and you didn't know how to deal with it, you were unsure, maybe it was frightening or challenging. Is there anything that springs to mind as like a teaching kind of example?
I feel like it's very important when we're working with groups to make room for all of that, that everything's welcome here. But at the same time, particularly around rage, so many people have been terrified by rage. And that's when they'll also flip back into a very young state, right? It's like, this is scary. This is threatening. So we try to contextualize it a lot, keep bringing them back into the adult state, but also saying, for many of you where rage was seen and experienced as dangerous, we want the adult to begin to see that someone expressing that outrage right now is actually healing, that that's a gesture of their own protest. See, grief isn't just about tears, is it? It's also about outrage. It's about protesting what's harming the things that we love. And we need to protest. We actually have a whole section in our grief ritual around writing protests. Enough. How dare you? I say it matters. This is not all right with me. And getting people to begin to touch that protest is very helpful and very necessary. So we try to make room for the entire range of emotional experiences that come along with grief. And fear is often very much tangled up with grief, and so is, shame. When we talk
That's a
about
big one.
when we talk about the obstacles to grieving, self-consciousness is huge. Like, am I doing this right? Well, that person's crying much better than I am. Uh, you know, so all of these comparisons that come out about performance come up. And then, of course, just the anxiety and terror around the feeling state. And part of what that arises from is that when we come close to those feelings of grief, it often feels like it has no bottom. That if I go into that, I'm going to be in free fall forever. So again, that's part of the learning process is how does the adult put a bottom underneath their grief? And how do you build faith in grief again? A lot of our terror is that we don't have faith. We feel like this is a hostage situation, like I said before. This is going to take me over. I've heard in my office many, many times, if I go there, I'm never coming back.
Mm.
And I end up saying to them, if you don't go there, you're never coming back.
Mm.
Because so much of our vitality is locked up in shunting this to the farthest edges of our awareness. So we don't have to deal with it. Well, that requires a great deal of psychic energy to numb ourselves down. So there's always a cost to that. So welcoming fear, welcoming shame, welcoming all these outcasts, which ties us back into the second gate of grief, right? The parts of us that have not known love, the unacceptable parts of me that we have to get rid of: neediness, sadness, anger, sensuality, exuberance. I mean, so many things don't fit into the collective norms of white Western society. And consequently, we're diminished beings, domesticated, you know.
Mm. It's a hard thing to work through those feelings in a circle, in the presence of whether they're strangers or people you know, because we're not equipped. Our educational system doesn't equip us with how to sit with difficult emotions, how to hold space. It teaches us the opposite. And even myself, sometimes I'm in a circle as a participant and I know the process and I know intellectually what might be happening. I could say, okay, I have some obstacle. I'm feeling something, but I can't quite touch it. And there's that same fear that you're talking about if I touch this, I don't know how deep it's going to go. When I let this door open, this could be an avalanche that just drowns the whole space. And do I want to do that? Do I want to put my bullshit out on everybody right now? And it's so counterintuitive because usually in doing that, that is how you connect most deeply to others because they really see you and they see what you're holding. So this stuff is so interesting because it's not an intellectual exercise. It's so felt and somatic, and I hate that we aren't taught how to do this.
Me too. Yeah, it's a profound loss, isn't it? And it goes back to what we were saying earlier about the uncertainty of our belonging. We become performers of our lives rather than livers of our life. We're performing throughout the day to try to make sure we don't get caught, that we don't get seen as inadequate or inappropriate, or we're monitoring all the time, and certain that those feeling states, if I let them out, will be the ruin of me, and people will all move away from me. And It will confirm our solitude, our isolation, not solitude, but our isolation. See, I was right. Should never have done that. Should never expressed it. But I've never seen that happen. I've never seen grief just swallow a person. I could see, there's been times at the grief shrine when someone gets lost down there, when the grief is really strong. And see, even when in the midst of your most intense grief, you're still aware that you're grieving, right? There's still a part of you witnessing, damn, this is intense. Wow. Holy shit. Hang on. And once in a while, like maybe half a dozen times, and I've led over 100 grief rituals, maybe half a dozen times I'll notice someone not moving down there. And you can feel that they've got lost in their grief. And when there's no longer a witness to it, I call it grieving grief. It's unproductive. It's not moving. It's not being processed. It's just kind of avalanching. So we send one of our team down there to slowly bring them back, to check in. Are you with us? What's happening? And sometimes we'll put water to cool on the back of their hands, to cool them down around their forehead or back of their neck, just to cool it down. And ritual is designed to create heat and intensity, right? You're trying to activate something, right? And sometimes you have to do the opposite. You have to cool and soothe, get them to sit up, to make eye contact, and then come back to the circle. And they can still keep grieving, but stay in the village, and just modulate. So part of, again, the work of the facilitator is modulation. How do you modulate heat? How do you modulate cooling? How do you modulate, presence? So you don't get lost down there. I forgot your question, Loomis.
But I think we're in a liminal space, so I like the direction that you went there. So I'm happy for what you said there, because that's insightful for me, and I like the elemental component of heat and cold and using water and temperature to invite them into the space and have them be a part of that. I mean, I guess natural.
Go ahead.
Naturally, I guess it happens, right? Because water, tears are just streaming down people's faces. So you already have this kind of offering of water and salt and stuff from inside of ourselves, but also using water. Do you use other elements? Like, do you prefer to do this work in spaces where, let's say, like wind can move through and fire can be lit, or does that depend on the event?
It depends. I mean, most of the times we're working indoors, just for containment's sake. But it's a water ritual. Grief rituals are water rituals. We have water in the central shrine. We have bowls of water down there at the grief shrine, so people could put their hands in there and, wash their face or whatever they want to do. It's evocative. I remember there's one woman in our community, oftentimes she couldn't find her tears, and we just said, go down to the shrine, put your hand in the water. Boom. She did that, and her tears just started to flow. And so there's a correspondence, right? There's a relationship between those elements. We have done water and fire grief rituals. I remember after 9/11, after the trade towers collapsed, we had a grief ritual scheduled a few, weeks after that. And there was so much outrage in the room. And we happened to be working in this beautiful lodge. It had this gigantic fireplace, one of those you can basically walk into. So we built a big fire in there, and we had our water shrine, and we started the ritual. And it was like watching, O'Hare Airport. Somebody would onto the water shrine and cry, and then touch into this rage and run down to the fire shrine and throw some kindling into the fire, and people down there at the fire shrine expressing their rage, and then suddenly the wave of grief, then they would run down to the water shrine, and it was dynamic. It was powerful. But we've done fire rituals and different elemental rituals during our work with different communities. But this is typically a water ritual.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also a brilliant insight for me. I had never made the connection, but yeah, of course it is. You know, water is pouring out of your eyes, snot drooling on your, so you're just ugly
Mm-hmm.
crying in front of a group of people, and it it's also interesting because something happens that the body knows that the intellect doesn't in those moments. Like the body is doing something that, how does it know how to do that? It's some ancient knowledge. Maybe this goes back to what you were saying about what Jung had said about, forget the term that you used to describe it, but this.
Unforgotten wisdom. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So is
Yeah.
it
I
that like?
mean, I imagine that, just instinctively, this is the body's approach to sorrow. It doesn't want to hold it back. We hold it back through intellect, through self-consciousness, through, uncertainties. But when you're in the space where it's permitted and you're open to it, yeah, we call ritual embodied process. You don't
Hmm,
think your way through ritual.
yes.
You can't. I mean, if you're thinking your way through ritual, you're not in ritual. You're in some abstraction, some conceptualization. I mean, I love the mind. I love thoughts and thinking and ideas. But when you get into ritual, give it something to do. So that's why we sing a song. That's why we give the mind something to do. But it is certainly not the main actor in this process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because the body goes into crisis when, like, I've been in situations before where that, in community building, we use this term like moved to speak. Like you literally feel something moving through you. And there have been times where I've been kind of holding it. I was in a facilitation role, so it didn't feel appropriate to share my thing with the group because I'm space holding. And it got so powerful, like the movement was so profound that I felt physically ill. Like I started to feel like deep fear that if I don't speak right now, if I don't let this grief out, like I might die, right? Like it literally
Mm,
felt like I might die right now if I don't speak. My
mm,
heart was pounding. It was like my heart was just going to rupture out of my body. So I know what you mean, where like you have to let it move and you can't think your way through it. And if you hold it back, this has really harmful consequences, I think, on your organism.
absolutely. Absolutely. And that kind of self-contained, self-restrained, you know, ideology deprives us of the things that we need in those moments. We need the witnessing, we need the touch, we need the holding, but that self-control thing deprives us over and over again of what it is that we need in order to let it move. So one of the axioms I work with, and this comes out of alchemy, which is that whatever in the vessel, you have to keep it warm. So if we don't approach our grief with warmth, but more with suspicion, with judgment, with contempt, and we push it away, that's cold. And then what happens in the heart is that our grief congeals and hardens and doesn't move. So ritual spaces, writing, dancing, singing, poetry, art, these are all ways that we can keep it warm. And if we keep the grief warm, movement is possible. Again, we don't want this to become sediment. I often say that people came into my office complaining of depression, and really what it was oppression.
Mm,
The undigested grief had settled on them like sediment, and it was weighing them down. I mean, I could put myself in that same sentence. It weighed me down because I couldn't express it. I had to be in charge, be in control. So getting that permission to express it again and keep it warm. That becomes a primary responsibility of every individual. How do I keep my grief warm? How do I talk about it, share it, write about it? You know, all the things to keep feeding the fire. Yeah.
That's actually a really good point, because I could imagine there may be some listeners who hear this and maybe they are gripped by grief right now, some difficult circumstances happening in their life, and they hear this and they go, okay, how can I keep that grief warm? Would you recommend it is by writing, it is by speaking about it is by singing it out? Or like, what are some practical things people can do to try to get in contact with it?
Well, all of the above. I mean, whatever you're drawn to. If you're a dancer, if you like movement, dance your grief. Put on some really melancholy, beautiful, deep, soulful music and just dance. Let your grief pull you to the ground. Let it roll you around. Let it get on your knees. If you're an artist, a painter, what colors would you grab to express this sorrow right now? If you're a writer, God, there's so many prompts that we use to express, I did not get to. I miss, I long. Now that you're gone, goodbye. I mean, there's so many things that you can use to prompt all of the underground material. Uh, Friendship, just talking about your grief with a friend. I mean, all of it. uh, The little caveat on that one: choose a wise friend. But there's a part of us that's so skillful at choosing the wrong people at the wrong time to share the wrong things. And we get convinced again, see, it's not safe to talk about this. I have to keep it private. So find the right people that will say, I hear you, and that's all welcome here, and that's hard. Just someone who can just acknowledge the fact that what you're carrying in your heart is heavy and sometimes all too much. And we need companionship. We need friendship. So very simple things to keep it warm. Just noticing, paying attention. When the moods come, the sad blue moods come, be a good host. Sit with it. Ask it what it wants. What do you need from me? Rather than how do I get out of here? Our first move is frequently, where's the exit? I don't like this room. But again, that's building that faith again, right? Can I have faith that this is not a pathology? This is actually my heart's registering, my soul's acknowledgement of loss, of suffering, of disappearance, you know? Yeah.
Thank you for those. And I have a couple more questions on the general ritual and facilitation stuff, and then we could transition out of that. One thing that's always been interesting to me, because I find myself drawn to these more spiritual, sort of animist ideas that, like, where does the grief go when you release it? Before you said, you pitch it over and it goes somewhere. Like, I have this sense that it is moving somewhere. But that's not my question for you, because I know it's unanswerable. Um, where does the grief go? I don't know. But a more
Pittsburgh, I
practical,
think, but
a more practical question is like, how do you, maybe you've identified some things that you do. How do you cleanse energetically after a ritual? Because, you're holding things, you're absorbing things, you're in the presence of things. And I feel sometimes it is necessary to find a way to cleanse those. And I don't know if I hear people talk about this often enough.
it's a good question. Yes. Kind of a couple of thoughts crashed into each other there. Um, the role of the facilitator is a role. It's not who I am. It's not my identity. Jung talked about the value and necessity of personas. Personas are masks that we put on, but that doesn't mean artificial. It doesn't mean not genuine. It doesn't mean not authentic. It means in this moment, the role I'm putting on. I mean, if you look at a lot of traditional cultures, they use masks a lot in ritual
Mm-hmm.
spaces because I'm not being me this in this moment. I'm being this. I'm carrying the energy of this. And so, as well as a facilitator, to put on the mask of the facilitator means I'm in this role for you now. And this is all I'm doing right now is bringing this medicine to you. that comes through this identity of facilitator, right? Leaving that space, take off the mask. It's very important to take off the mask and become an ordinary human being again, who has your own grief and your own foolishness and your own mistakes and your own shame and, all the crap that we carry around. But then back to the water. The first thing we do when we get home is shower. Minimally wash hands and face. It isn't to say that what we experienced is negative, but that it's not mine. And I don't want to carry this around. I want to thank the water spirit for cleansing, for washing, for caring for these people over these last 3 days, but this is over, and I'm not carrying this around, you know? When I first was a therapist back in the late '70s, early '80s, I was working at a community, mental health agency with schizophrenics, and I'd go home and go to bed at 5 o'clock. I was trying I was carrying their craziness. I was carrying their, mind states, and one of my teachers says, "You do that, you're gonna die, and you're gonna become completely useless." So she said, "Imagine yourself like a net." You know, the water comes through, things touch the fabric of the net, but they don't get caught there. So compassion, my compassion is right there. Oh, God, that story you just shared, whoa, but I can't pick that up. I can't pick that up. If I do, I'll be useless to you. But I'm here right now, holding you in this moment fully, wholeheartedly. But yeah, letting it go, letting it go. I've done rituals with stones where sometimes when the weight has been so big, I'll take a large stone and just get a marker and just start writing all of the stories, all of the things that are weighing me down, and I'll take it out into nature and dig a hole and ask the earth to take this now. Take this for me. I can't do this. It's too much. You can make beauty out of this. You can grow green stuff out of this. You can compost this into microbes and mycelia and magic, and I can't. That's not in my capacity. So please lift this from me. So small rituals of maintenance again, soul hygiene. Take care of yourself. Don't carry this shit around. It's not yours. You got your enough by yourself.
Thank you. Those are all
Mm,
useful, particularly the mask and realizing that this is a role, and underneath that mask,
right,
you are a human being with all of
right.
your own shit.
Yeah.
And that also, it wasn't a question that I had for you, but it inspired one. I'm sure you're familiar with this phenomenon where in community building, we call it killing the facilitator, where someone just doesn't want to sit with that grief, or there's so much rage, and instead of directing it in a productive place, you become the recipient of that. And sometimes it's interesting because it can be hard as a facilitator to have that mask in place when you're being attacked as a human. And so, do you have any guidance for a situation like that of how to, separate that and keep your sense of distance between, seeing someone who is in a compromised situation? They don't mean to cause you harm. So this, but
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to take it personally, but that's kind of what the invitation is, just to not take it personally, right? You become the stand-in, for what it is that they're carrying, whatever rage or hurt or shame or, trauma that they're carrying. And if they're steady enough, if I can work with them, I'll work with them, to get them back into the adult presence and, what's stirring right now for you? The other thing is that when I get home or when I am finished and taking this mask off, I can share how what did it touch in me? my own insecurities with the people that I trust. I've
Mm.
done this ritual with a lot of my mentees where I ask them to literally make a mask, to craft a mask. On the outside of the mask is, what medicine are you bringing to the world? And on the inside of the mask, they write what they want, what I call the trustees of their ordinary self, to help them carry. My insecurities, my fears, my loneliness, my, shame, my history, whatever it is, that doesn't belong out in the world. That belongs to the trustees of your ordinary self, the closest people around you. And when they're there to help you hold those things, it makes it, those encounters that sometimes happen in group dynamics, a lot less painful and a lot less penetrating. They can stay on the outside of the mask a little bit better. If you have a place to take the inside, what James Hillman called your secret inside flesh, to take that to places of great refuge. Yeah.
Beautiful wisdom. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Um,
Yeah.
and then this will be my final question here because it's a personal question. Not my final question of the interview, but of this segment. And it's what does this work ask of you personally? Not what you offer others, but what the work asks or demands or the moves inside Francis Weller.
Well, as I've said, the most important is to stay current. Um, and that's hard these days. There are many days I wake up in despair. What's happening in this country of the United States is just heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. I remember going to bed, I think I tell this story in The Absence of the Ordinary. In 2020, on the night of the election, I thought the same results were going to happen, and I was heading to bed, and something literally pivoted me and took me over to one of my bookshelves over here and reached up and selected a very particular volume by Linda Hogan, the Chickasaw poet and writer. Opened the book to the chapter, All My Relations. And I realized in that moment I had forgotten all my relations. My despair was a consequence of my isolation. So I began to send out filaments to the moon and to the star clusters and to the redwoods and the oak and the fir trees and the ferns and the otters and salmon and all the little crawly people, and my despair lifted greatly in that moment. So part of what I have to do is sustain my intimacies with the surrounding field. I'm not doing this work alone. I never am. I'm always surrounded by ancestors. I'm surrounded by allies, compatriots of the wider green world, the wider wild world. And if I can remember them and stay connected to all my relations, that's where my authority arises. See, power for a facilitator is not personal. It's not mine. I want to be authorized by both the community that I'm sitting with, but also by the surrounding community that I'm part of. When that authorization comes in, then my authority, in a sense, can't be challenged because you're not challenging me. That's part of that role again as a facilitator, as a leader. I'm being authorized by all of this to sit here in this chair with you. It's not an ego thing at all. It's a soul thing. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I can only do that in good relationship to the rest of the world. Yeah.
Thank you again. I have a couple more questions that are personal because, in reading your book and knowing that you do this work, there is a desire to connect personally and get some insights. And so I'm curious about these things. And one of these questions is that after all of these years of doing this work, sitting with people in their deepest sorrows, Is there something that you still find really hard about it? Like, what hasn't gotten easier about it?
I would say now it's the magnitude of it. Um, it's in every breath. Its persistence is increasing, not decreasing, and knowing that we're in the long dark, as I call it. Mm, this is not a time of confidence or ease or rising or growth. We're, as I say, hunkered down, and so that's not an easy place to be in. So we need things. We need friendship. We need imagination. We need creativity. We need beauty. We need to touch into that deep time ancestral ground. We need patience. We need resilience. It's a hard time. I'm not kidding anybody. I feel it every day. I just need to keep remembering that I can be held by something larger, and that gives me a sense of being able to keep facing what's coming. Facing the world with soul, as I say. Mhm.
That word soul that you just used there, what is the relationship between that and grief?
Grief is one of the primary expressions of soul.
Hmm.
You know, when we talk about an intimate exchange, a soulful exchange, it's usually when we touch into what's vulnerable, right? We come into the deep parts of ourselves. So soul, that's its home in the depths, in the dark. And so whenever we express something that deep, we are in the territory of soul, and grief is it's one of its primary expressions. Because if we don't separate grief and love, we see them as a continuum. That's as soulful as it gets. We love and we lose, and that's the deep part of the pool. You know.
Okay, Francis.
All right, Danny.
I usually leave the last minute here for you. If there's something you have going on that you want to let people know about, or where they could find you if they want to learn more about you.
Well, they're welcome to visit my site, francisweller.net. Um, but I'm really in a phase of quiet right now, and writing is what I'm primarily doing, and trying to finish an essay on white emptiness, which has been a challenging piece to write. And then a much larger book on facing the world with soul and why it matters. Those are my next projects. And yeah. Thanks for having me, Danny.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for spending time with me here. If it is your quiet time, I'm privileged to have spent that with you for for a big chunk of it. So I'm very grateful. I'm grateful for your work, for everything that you shared here, for venturing into this space with me, and everything about this was a gift for me. So really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for the work you do and for passing through with me today.
Well, thank you, Danny. I think you did a beautiful job today of keeping the flow and also opening up new territories and some places I'd have never even talked about before. So I appreciate that. It was good. It was good. And thank you for all you're doing with your community building work and the permaculture work and all the things that you're trying to seed and feed in the long dark. Yeah.
Thank you.
And you're getting pretty dark over there right now. I can barely see your face.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
a natural ending to our conversation.
Yes,
So.
I think so. I think so.
thank you for passing through today. Yeah, you, dear listener, thank you for your support, for your attention, for spending some time with me and this episode's guest. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe, rate it, like it, tell your friends about it, buy a billboard somewhere next to a highway promoting it. I mean, I'm kidding, of course, but your support really does mean a lot to me. So thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next time.